you got to err on the side of caution, right? So, and it's freezing cold out tonight. The heat is on in here. Thank you, Pastor. Appreciate that.
It's still on, right?
Okay. Welcome to Wednesday night Bible study. Welcome everyone in the house. Welcome those of you online. Just a reminder for those that are online, you can make comments if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, and we have people in the house that are monitoring. I don't see it, so don't just say something to me because I won't know about it. But happy that you're joining. Excited to be able to share a message tonight. I'm going to be reading from the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 19 through 23. That's the main passage. And just talking about what it means, what is our objective as Christians when we're leading people to Christ. And when I first started thinking about sharing this, it was a couple of weeks before Missions Week. And I didn't even know Missions Week was happening because I don't pay attention to what's going on the website. So it was sort of interesting. And again, it's how God moves that this message just sort of ties in. And especially if it had been last Wednesday, which would have been like the wrapping up of Missions Week. But truth is, my inspiration for this message came from this book that I'm reading, Moby Dick. I'm in a book club. And so I'm going to be reading a couple of passages from Moby Dick. This is not the Bible, I know that. I'm going to focus on the Word, but I want to share, why I was in, what sort of got me to where I was going. So I'm going to start by reading something, and that you'll see how I was then led to this passage. So I don't know who's read Moby Dick. I guess it is a book that people sometimes read in school. This is my first time reading it. I haven't finished it yet, so don't spoil it if you know the end of the story. But basically, in this, this is very much sort of affected by the gospel. Even the names of the people like Ishmael, Ahab, the references to the Bible in here. In fact, when I was online looking, people are like, "Do I have to read the Bible before I read Moby Dick to understand what he's talking about in some situations?" So the main character is Ishmael, and early on in the story, he meets a gentleman by the name of Queequeg, and he is someone from the Southern Islands, and they describe him as a cannibal. Whether that's just the era and they just sort of named everyone that came from an island a cannibal, I don't know, but not a Christian background. And Ishmael and Queequeg are thrown together to share a room in a hotel. And after supper, they're in the room, and Queequeg starts to get ready to pay homage to his god. And he's signaling to Ishmael to come over and join in. So the passage says, "I was a good Christian, born and bred in the bosom of the infallible Presbyterian Church. How then could I unite with this wild idolater in worshiping his piece of wood? But what is worship, thought I? Do you suppose now, Ishmael, that the magnanimous God of heaven and earth, pagans and all included, can possibly be jealous of an insignificant bit of black wood? Impossible. But what is worship? To do the will of God, that is worship. And what is the will of God? To do to my fellow man what I would have my fellow man do to me. That is the will of God. Now, Queequeg is my fellow man. And what do I wish that this Queequeg would do to me? Why, unite with me in my particular Presbyterian form of worship. Consequently, I must then unite with him in his. Ergo, I must turn idolater. So I kindled the shavings, helped prop up the innocent little idol, offered him burnt biscuit with Queequeg, etc., etc. And he goes on and finishes the process. So when I was reading the book, and again, I'm not suggesting that this is the right approach, and hear me out on this. I'm not saying we should worship pieces of wood or anything, but it got me thinking about this passage in 1 Corinthians. So I went and I read it, and as I was reading it, I realized that there's maybe things about this that I've not fully understood in the past, and I think that sometimes this does get, a little bit misinterpreted. So what I want to do is read the passage, and then we're going to ask some questions. I have three questions. What message do we glean from Paul's writing? What are some mistakes that we might make when applying these messages to our lives? And what was Paul's primary goal? And how do we apply this goal to our lives? And you don't have to memorize those questions. We'll come back to them. So if I could have someone read the first 5 verses of that. So that's chapter 19, verses 19 through 23. That's the entirety of what we're going to be looking at. So if I could have someone read those.
Which Corinthians?
Sorry, 1 Corinthians 9. Chapter 19 through 23, verses 19, 23. Yes.
Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone, to win as many as possible. To the Jews, I became like a Jew, to win the Jews. To those under the law, I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all men, so that by all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings.
Thank you. So before we start to really dig into that, I'm just going to, obviously there's context, and if you read the entirety of chapter 9, you'll get some of that context. I'm going to sort of do my best to summarize it. What Paul is talking about is that as an apostle of Christ, he has a right to receive financial support, whether material, money, whatever it might be, but he chooses to minister free of charge. He says in verses 3 through 6, he says, "This is my defense to those who sit in judgment on me. Don't we have the right to food and drink? Don't we have the right to take a believing wife along with us, as do the other apostles and the Lord's brothers and Cephas? Or is it only I and Barnabas who must work for a living?" So he's saying, don't I have a right to it? But he chooses to minister free of charge so that he can avoid any suggestion that his motive to preach is impacted by the financial gain. In verse 18 it says, "What then is my reward? Just this, that in preaching the gospel I may offer it free of charge, and so not make use of my rights in preaching it." So when we take that in context and we think about that, well, the first question is he saying that people in the ministry should work for free?
Of course not.
No, right? It's clear that he's not saying that. He's making it very clear that those that teach, or in whatever capacity, have a right to earn, right? But when we think about this context that we've looked at, when we look at the first verse that we're studying, verse 19, it says, "Though I am free and belong to no man, I make myself a slave to everyone to win as many as possible." So what does that mean when he says to make himself a slave?
To make him look good. He must look like the people that he's preaching to, so to get their attention, to get their confidence.
I mean, that could be part of it, yeah, that could be. Anyone else?
Usually the word slave refers to a bondservant when it's used. So if that's Paul's aim, he's referencing himself as one bound as a servant to those that he's ministering to. In this case, if that's the case he's reaching for, that would be an understanding.
And basically, that when you think about it, it says, I make myself a slave. The only way he can do that is if he's free, right? So he's saying, I'm free, but I choose to subserve myself to the people that I'm reaching for the sake of the gospel, in order to win them, to serve others. So, yeah, not a slave as in chains per se, but they would understand the context. So what does that mean for us? How do we apply this to our lives? If Paul is saying, he's giving up his rights to financial support and all whatever else he might get, he's entitled to, and he's saying, I'm going to sort of give up my freedom and turn over my freedom to the people, basically to serve like a slave the people that I'm trying to reach. Can we apply that to our lives? How can we apply that to our lives today? Not an easy question. Okay, I have the answer.
I mean, you can answer.
No, you go first.
But I was just thinking, like, when God called us to Wheaton, Winfield area, we were in southern Illinois, and the rent cost alone was double what it cost down there, and we, felt like God was calling us here, and I had said I was a stay-at-home mom, and I said, I'll do whatever it takes. If that's where God's calling us, I'll get a job, I'll work, we'll do what it takes. Because if that's where God's calling us to, those are the people God's calling us to, so we'll do what it takes to reach the people here.
Yeah.
And so, I became a slave to the workforce. No, just kidding. I didn't mean it. Anyways. But we did whatever it took to reach the people that God called us to. So we weren't in it.
And I think there's a better example when we were youth pastors, and she wanted to get a nose ring.
Oh.
Okay, let's unpack that.
It's cute. I don't have an issue with it, but we tried to do what was right by asking our lead pastor, hey, here's the idea. Her and a couple of her friends are going to go. They want to do this together. Is this we were submitting ourselves to leadership? He said, I don't have a problem with it. Okay, great, cool. She comes home with it, and instantly, within days, there is what we didn't know, upheaval amongst a small group of people in the church over it. And they had gone to the lead pastor. Well, he shows up at our house. We need to talk. And we're like, what? So he tells us what's going on. He said, I'm not telling you what to do, but, we're like, we came to you. Like, you didn't have, so we were struggling because we felt like we did the right thing going through the channels of submitting ourselves to leadership, and felt like there wasn't a whole lot of defense there. So we wrestled with it. We knew the group that was involved, and we thought, well, they can just get over it. That was one side of it. But as we proceeded to talk and pray through it, we felt like if that was going to be an obstacle for us to be able to minister to the heart of the people God had asked us to be at that specific church to do, then it had to go.
Yeah.
And even though we both enjoyed it, we had the right clearance from the leader, we opted to take it out so it would not serve as an obstacle to who God was asking us to be a part of. And that in that way, we chose her more than me, but that was the discussion that we're going to serve this way. We're going to lay these ideas down so that somebody else can be lifted up in the Lord.
Yeah. No, first of all, I really appreciate using the word obstacle a couple of times. I should have read my title, which is Moby Dick in 1 Corinthians, Removing Obstacles to the Gospel. So you using that word reminded me, that's in my title. And both of these examples, and I guess, just sort of back up a bit when I or anyone else are asking questions, I'm always trying to think of questions that can be answered like on a personal level, right? What does it mean to me, right? Because then there's sort of no right or wrong answer. This is my experience. This is my, what I'm going through. But my notes say we may feel that we have certain rights in life, but as believers, we should be willing to set them aside for the sake of the gospel. We might have to make sacrifices in life for the greater good. Maybe we have to deal with certain hardships or challenges that seem unfair, But God has a purpose for them, and we need to be open to patiently enduring while God works His perfect plan in and through us. So both of the things you're describing are exactly, line up with the notes. That, we just need to, we need to be able to accept some of the hardships that we go through, even if we cannot see any valid reason for them, because we have to trust that God has a plan. So we have to set aside our own plans, make ourselves a slave to whoever it is that we're ministering to, and accept that. And I touched on something that's when I think about, and I know it's in the Bible about not suing your brother, but I sort of, America is a very litigious society, right? Something happens and we immediately talk about suing, and I'm not saying that there isn't a time and a place for that. If someone is harmed because of something terrible that happened, and they need financial, recompense because they are now suffering. But when I think of Matthew 5:38-47, when he talks about, if someone takes your jacket, give him your shirt as well, and if he makes you go 1 mile, you go 2, and just this whole idea of just living so sacrificially that you give up things that you maybe have a right to for the sake of the gospel.
Julian?
Yes, I'm sorry.
God possesses everything. With that, and if we understand that, we are willing to suffer because we know the freedom that's coming to us as a free gift. So we're willing to put in, when He humbles our hearts, it changes us to know that we can work really hard. Not that that's what makes us good enough, but we ought to love God enough where we are willing to suffer.
Yeah, we were just talking about it in the car about, that the ultimate glory of being with Jesus. That, anything that we're going through in this world right now, even if the things that we suffer in this life, we don't see any resolution or reward in this life, the ultimate reward makes it all worthwhile. That's good. Moving on to verse 20, it says, to the Jews I become like a Jew to win the Jews. What is Paul saying in that verse there? I mean,
he was born Jewish. He became a Roman citizen. He bought his citizenship through the Roman one, and he was a Pharisee before becoming a Christian.
So, but what does it mean when it says, to the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews?
He was already Jewish to begin with, so he kind of probably reverted back to that, even though he's still free.
Yeah, I guess what I'm trying to, because he really has 3 different groups of people that he references in here, right? He says to the Jews, I become like a Jew to win the Jews. Then he talks about another group where he says, to those under the law, I became like one under the law. And then he says, to those not having the law, I became like one not having the law. So specifically for the Jewish people, what do you think that he was, like, practically, what was he doing or saying that he was doing in order to, I guess, connect with the Jewish people?
Here's an example of what I think of. Christian music. All the artists that write songs and record them and stuff. There's a couple named Glenn and Wendy Kaiser that had a band called Res Band from the 80s. And they did an interview about why they do what they do. And what they said they did was that before they became Christians, they listened to music that was pagan. But when they became Christians and they wanted to reach people where they were at, they were like, well, we'll play rock and roll, but we'll have a Christian message in it to reach the people. And that gave them a purpose for what they would do. So they were going into, they have Japuza in Chicago, so they go in and they reach the people in Chicago with their church, with the worship time that they have there.
Yeah.
So what they were basically saying, and I'll just end it at this, is that we create music to reach the people, and God has given us this plan with the style of music to reach the people with a Christian message in it.
Yeah.
Didn't give them license, but it gave them purpose, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's...
They were positioned where they were.
Right. I mean, obviously the challenge there, and this applies to any area of our lives when, as a believer, we're walking down certain paths, in more pagan lifestyle, is making sure that we're not sending a mixed message.
Yeah.
And that almost goes to the passage in Moby Dick where, again, I think Ishmael probably was potentially sending a bit of a mixed message when he was actually worshiping the idol, right? So.
Well, Paul addresses, wow, gosh, there's so much here. Paul addresses that when he talks about meat sacrificed to idols. There's a difference. He says, okay, if you're buying the meat in the marketplace, that's one thing, but you're not in the process of sacrificing the meat to the idol. So I agree with you in your story on that. It is a little different than we would approach the scenario. But I think what Paul is talking about, becoming like a Jew. We look at Paul's, and Heather talked about it, Paul was born a Jew. And he was a Pharisee of Pharisees. He knew the law. So all of these things that he describes, he has a foot in.
Yeah.
He literally has experience in every one of them, prior to Christ and after Christ. But when he says, to the Jews I became like a Jew, even though there was a struggle with the Judaizers that followed Paul around requiring that Christians be circumcised and follow certain things, and there became an issue in the church, Paul continued to show respect for them. In fact, was it Timothy that he required to be circumcised so he could continue to minister to the Jewish people?
Right.
So you see this element where he recognizes that he's not going to tread upon what they hold. It's not a bad thing in the grand scheme of his history, but he honors it so that he can have a voice. And he continued to preach in the synagogues, right? He continued to honor the Sabbath. He continued to do those things that a Jew would uphold so that the gospel could be heard. So for me, I think that's what Paul's talking about when he says, to the Jew I became a Jew.
Right. Yeah. And jumping ahead a little bit, where he's very clear in verse 21, where he says, though I am not free from God's law, but I'm under Christ's law. He's saying, as long as I'm not doing anything that steps out of the boundaries of the law that Jesus has laid out for me, then I'm free to mix and mingle with these people and do things that so that we can relate to each other, so that they can come to know the gospel, right? Because that's really ultimately what he's trying to do here, right? And he says that the whole purpose of this is to win some to Christ.
Yep.
The second question I asked was, what are some mistakes that we might make when applying these messages to our lives? And I'm just going to sort of read the answer a little bit, because we've already sort of touched on it, which is we might see this passage as a license to live in a way that contradicts the Word, so that we can, quote unquote, connect with a non-believer. So we might have the right intentions with what we're doing, but we just have to be careful not to cross that line where, like in the example with Ishmael, he probably overstepped the line by actually worshiping the idol. His heart was pure, his intent was good, but it's important to not, step over that line. So Paul is saying, and again, it's the idea about removing obstacles without compromising the Word is really what his message is. And we're going to come back to the idea of these obstacles a little bit later. Another question, what harm do you think we can cause by compromising the Word in an effort to reach the lost? What harm do you think we might cause by compromising the Word when we're trying to reach people?
I think it's that verse, that says, you lose that saltiness. What good is it? What good are you but to be trampled? Like you lose that effective gospel message when we're timid.
Like it's watered down.
Yeah, we're timid. We want to blend in. We don't want to offend. The gospel is offensive, but it is also life-giving, and it's up to the recipient whether they want to, accept it or reject it. And our job is to give a clear message of the gospel.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I would say probably like most of the same thing, like giving maybe the wrong message or telling people what they want to hear to make them believe.
To entice them.
Yeah, and also, if you send a mixed message and they start to analyze it a little bit, that can then actually push them away, right? I mean, if you're trying to share the gospel, but you're saying things or behaving in a way that they're like, well, someone else was saying that whatever XYZ, and this Christian over here is ABC. Well, I don't know if I want this Christianity thing. It doesn't it doesn't have the flavor, that good taste that we're supposed to have when we chew on the word and when we interact with a believer. I'm going to read another passage from Moby Dick to sort of demonstrate this point. So we've met Queequeg. We know who he is, and we get a little bit of a backstory as to how he ended up in the northern hemisphere. He was the son of a king of this tribe, and he wanted to explore the world and see more of what, as he called it, Christendom. He was curious about, these white people and this God that they talked about. So he wanted to go and find out. So he sneaks onto a boat and he gets up into the northern hemisphere. So it says, for at bottom, so he told me, he was actuated by a profound desire to learn among the Christians the arts whereby to make his people still happier than they were, and more than that, still better than they were. So he was like, I want to go there, learn the gospel so I can bring it back to my people. I mean, he's like the ultimate missionary, right? But alas, the practices of whalemen soon convinced him that even Christians could be miserable and wicked, infinitely more so than all his father's heathens. Arriving at last in Old Sag Harbor and seeing what the sailors did there, and then going on to Nantucket and seeing how they spent their wages in that place also, poor Queequeg gave it up for lost. Thought he, it's a wicked world in all meridians, I'll die a pagan. So he wanted to find out about Christianity, and this was obviously a few hundred years ago. So the assumption was if you were a white person living in America, you were a Christian, sort of thing. That was certainly the way it was purported to anyone from a foreign country. And when he came and he saw the way people behaved, how they spent their money, he's like, wow, they're worse than my family back home. This is not going to work for me, sort of thing. So he went from being curious to being disappointed and basically driven away by what he saw. I asked the question, what turns people away? It's hypocrisy. It's arrogance. It's self-righteous judgment. Those are those are things that can just push people away from the gospel. And this is a rhetorical question, but to ask yourself if you can think back about things about you, the way you behave, what you say, what you do, mistakes you might have made that might have caused someone to reject the gospel that you were trying to share. I got some for me. I can tend to be, believe it or not, a little bit cynical and a little bit sarcastic, for those of you that know me. That can definitely turn people off, right? And so like in my workplace, people know that I'm a Christian. I talk about it. I invite people to church. But if then I start acting in such a way that someone goes, well, he's no different than me, and he says this and he does that, and he says, behaves this way. And I'm going to talk about that later. I mean, ultimately, they have to make their own choices, but we are responsible. We are the vehicle that God is using to get the gospel out there. And if we're behaving in a way that causes people to be turned off by it, then we're failing. So I'm not asking for anyone to share, unless you want to share your attributes that drive people away from the gospel.
Well, I think in this time that we're living in, which is pretty nuts, when we tell the truth, we make enemies. When we tell the truth, we make enemies. And I'm wondering, and since God knows that, that's the part of suffering that I'm talking about, is that when we know the truth and we try to share it in love,
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but that's the key phrase, in love.
In love, yeah.
Right? Because what we might think is in love, if the recipient doesn't hear it in love or can't feel that love that we claim we're showing when we share it, then we just come across as abrasive and these other, arrogant, self-righteous, whatever it might be. So I'm not talking about watering down the gospel, because I understand 100% what you're saying, that, if we share the truth hurts, the truth, but it's finding out how to do it in a way, and again, I think that goes back to what Paul is saying, that when he says, and, when he goes on, he talks about, to the weak I become weak to win the weak. He's not compromising the gospel. He makes that really clear. But he's adapting himself to those that he's ministering to. And I think sometimes as Christians, we can just have one way, and it's the highway, or you take it or leave it sort of thing. And we can go, well, it's the truth, and if you don't like it, that's bad luck for you, sort of thing. You made a bad choice. But I think that Paul is challenging us to learn to adapt to who you're witnessing to and how you're witnessing, and without watering down the truth of the gospel, be aware of your audience and be aware of. And I'm going to, if I have time, I'm going to talk about different examples, different types of people that we might come into contact with, and how we need to sort of treat them. So, in fact, as I look at the clock, I can't split this up into two because I'm not here next week. So, where do we learn these attributes? Where do we learn the cynicism and the sarcasm and all these things? Where does that?
I would say more like from TV, media, what we listen to, people we associate with.
Yeah.
You associate with bad people, you turn out to be a bad person.
Yeah, it's the sin nature of man. I mean, it
comes natural to me.
It just, thank you, me too. There you go. It's just natural. It's all good. Yeah, I mean, it does come natural. I mean, that's my thorn in my flesh, right? My cynicism, whatever it might be. But yes, we learn it because it's all around us, and it's in our nature. It's and God. Yes, we're born again, but we will continue to have these struggles. As we're sanctified throughout the salvation, the rest of our lives. But we don't suddenly become perfect. We don't suddenly lose these flaws because we're still human. We're still going to struggle.
Sorry, what Philip was saying was true, though. What we're feeding is what.
100%. Yes. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And circling back to the word hypocrisy that we used earlier, there's a difference between the struggle in the fight that we engage with against the cynicism and our sin flesh. There's a difference between that in weakness that Paul associates, when he says, to the weak I became weak. Hey, look, I don't, he could be transparent about some of his own struggles in his walk with God, right? But the difference between that and hypocrisy is I'm saying one thing and I'm knowingly living another, right? So there's the terror, right? People will wrongly attribute hypocrisy in the church, and there is, I mean, to be truthful, there is in the church. But I think what people identify as hypocrisy is that process of the fight against our flesh as we're growing, and sometimes it's wrongly attributed. Yeah. So I do think it's it's a fine line on whether we're pursuing the hypocrisy or we're fighting the battle, right? And I heard a pastor say, "Look, I'm fine with you struggling with sin, but at least struggle,
right?
At least fight.
Yeah.
Don't
just give in to it and
live that way.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
No, that's good. I mean, our challenge is to live a life that points others to Christ, right? Because He's the one that does the saving. We don't save people. The problem is often that we let our humanity get in the way of the Christ in me. We just keep getting in the way.
I think on the flip side of that, of like our humanity getting in the way of like, maybe we understand we shouldn't be showing this sarcasm and this hypocrisy, but we almost swing the other way then, so we don't show those struggles. And we lose the fact that like it's the Lord that's bringing us through these things, because we don't want to show them that we're struggling. We don't want to show them, because we may feel like, oh, well, we're communicating that we don't have hope, or we're communicating that the Lord won't get us through. But that's not true. It's talking about the world isn't perfect, but I have a God that is perfect.
Right.
I'm trusting Him in that. And I think that's maybe sometimes a thorn in our flesh too, of like we feel the need to show perfection, so it's something that they can hope towards, but then that's also a false image. So when someone then maybe accepts Christ, they have this false image of what life with Christ is like.
Right. Suddenly everything's going to be if you accept Christ, all your troubles are going to go away and you're going to be a wonderful person and you'll be holy and all of those things, and guess what? It doesn't happen, you know. So for sure. So let's go to verse 22, where he says, to the weak I became weak to win the weak. Who do we think the weak are? Who are the weak?
Could it be the poor?
What's that?
Could it be the poor?
Could be the poor, yep.
I think it might be those who are weak in their faith, right? He talks about we shouldn't flaunt our freedom in front of those. So he was even speaking about like some who didn't want to eat the meat that had been sacrificed to idols.
Yeah, can you turn yourself up a little bit? I
get it.
You got okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, and probably the people online can hear, but I couldn't quite hear, probably because it's behind me and I've got bad hearing. But yeah, so it's people that are struggling in their faith. It's people who are maybe physically weak, right? The lame. People have low social standing. Maybe not just poor, but come from a certain people group. And so when it says he became weak, obviously he can't take on physical weaknesses if he doesn't have them. I mean, he's not going to like hurt himself so that he has a limp, but I think that what he's saying there is he connects with people that might otherwise feel unworthy of his love and his attention by helping them to feel like he empathizes with them. Romans 12:16 says, to live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. And this kind of goes to what Sharon was saying, that sometimes when we open up about our weaknesses and our failings, whether they're right now or things that we used to struggle with, it still brings a level of humanity to our witness that we might not otherwise have if we just pretended that, ever since I got saved, I've been perfect. I don't make any mistakes. Everything's good. You can have this too. It's not. That's not the truth, right? So again, that's an obstacle that we can remove by. And it's not about lowering yourself to someone else's position. It's about bringing yourself to them. It's it's like just relating to them at whatever their struggle might be. Yes.
Yeah, I think he's talking also about those who cannot repay you. Those that God calls us to love, and they're not going to reciprocate or can't, or where you have to just give yourself freely to them.
Yeah.
Exhibiting that kind of Christ love and not expecting anything in return.
Yeah, and that's good. We're going to hopefully touch on that. But yes, because it's easy to to give of yourself to someone that's going to give something back, even if it's just applause or attaboys or whatever, but to be willing to give of yourself to someone that either is unable or doesn't know how to reciprocate that gift, and yet still be willing to give of yourself like that. So yeah, that's great. Who else can we think of that does this or did this giving of themselves? Did you have an answer?
Well, it has to be Jesus.
It's always Jesus. The answer is always Jesus. If you didn't know that, it's always Jesus. Yeah, I mean, God came in the form of man. He removed any obstacles that might have existed that would have caused us to feel like we can't connect with him. And by becoming a lowly man, by living and dying as a man, he allowed us to be like, okay, I can have a relationship with this God because we're on the same level. Don't get me wrong there, we're not on the same level, but we can connect on the same level. When we're going through something, we know that he went through it, right? I mean, he understands when we're suffering, he understands when we're hurting because he suffered and hurt as well. So,
Can I read a verse?
Excuse me?
Can I read a verse real quick?
I guess.
Okay, sorry. And he is able to deal gently.
Where are you reading from, please?
Hebrews 5:2. And he is able to deal gently with ignorant and wayward people because he himself is subject to the same weaknesses. That is why he must offer sacrifice. Okay, then it's talking about the priest, and then it talks about how Jesus took on that for us, and he became familiar with our weaknesses so that he could be a faithful high priest.
Yeah, I have a different verse. Can I read my verse?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Probably better.
So Philippians 2:5-8 says, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, you could say slave, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross.
Yeah.
Christy found that verse for me. We're a team, what can I say? The third question, what is Paul's ultimate goal, and how do we apply that goal in our lives? So in this passage, what does Paul say several times that his ultimate goal is?
That he may win some.
To win some, right? He says, I like how he says that as well, you know, that he uses the word some. I've become all things to all men so that by all possible means I might save some. He doesn't say save all. And I think that just, to me, that kind of takes a weight off. It's like, you know, if Paul's goal was to win some, then some is okay, right? We don't have to feel like every person that, we should always be sharing the gospel. But what I mean is it shouldn't be like this weighty burden on us. I just talked to someone else today. That's someone else I have to win to Christ. We've heard this so many times, right? Some sow, some pray, you know, some reap. It's you don't know what you do that is going to affect someone else, and someone else is going to lead that person to Christ 20, 30 years later. So we shouldn't feel that burden. So yeah, we need to be effective in our witness by connecting with as many people and on many different levels, as long as we don't compromise the inerrant Word of God, and we do all this for the sake of the gospel. So now we're going to touch on a couple of examples of obstacles that we can try to remove without compromising the gospel. And I'm just going to sort of read through these. So the first one I have here is political and ideological divides. Regardless of which party you identify with, your willingness to set aside your unnecessary differences and be open to connecting with people that have opposing viewpoints and avoid inflammatory comments will allow you to minister to those that you may otherwise not connect with. I'll just leave that right there. Again, we know that if we know the Word, we know what the truth is, and we can say this is the truth. But if we want to reach people that have a different viewpoint from us, and in this case I'm talking about with political, but if we want to reach people, then we're not going to reach them if we start putting up barriers about what we believe about certain things. So, you know, forget about what party you vote for or how strongly you support a certain person. If you want to reach someone that's on the other side of the aisle, you're not going to reach them if you just keep on talk, and I'm, whatever side of the aisle you're on, I'm not, I'm not saying one's right or wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm saying take that obstacle away. It's not a necessary obstacle unless what a particular party may be saying or doing goes against Scripture, in which case you can highlight that. You can talk about it as part of your witnessing, as part of your sharing, but that shouldn't be your primary thing. It shouldn't be, that shouldn't be what the focus of your discussion is. Your focus of your discussion is to bring people to Jesus, right? To somehow share that gospel.
And it even happens in the church. You're talking about outside of the church, but I just recently heard a pastor, when speaking about modesty from the platform, said, I mean, come on, ladies, there's some barns in here that need some painting. And said something about wearing those skimpy outfits. I forget, if you don't want guys to look. I mean, it was very curt, and you used the word inflammatory, and I heard that and I went, well, there's truth to modesty, but there's certainly got to be better tact than the way that dude just divided that room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
No.
It's a humorous illustration, right?
Yeah.
I heard that in the church once. A pastor say that, and I literally, that was the day that I was getting out of my seat and never coming back to that church. Not that I was dressed scantily, but it is I mean, if you want to say something like that to somebody, or like instruct somebody out of concern or love, like there's
much different ways than
from the pulpit
like that. Yeah.
But that's what we do all the time is, this party is better and this party is going to save the world. And no, Jesus saved the world.
Right.
So we need to stop picking our parties.
Yeah. The next one I have is connecting with marginalized groups. And I was, a lot of what we heard about in Missions Week was going to other countries, other parts of the world, reaching people for the gospel that are poor or needy or whatever that country is, or separated from the from the opportunity of hearing the gospel. But there's people in our world. There's poor people in America. There are immigrants in America. There are those that are incarcerated. There are those that are struggling with addictions. These people need to be reached for the gospel as well. And how do we do that? Maybe it means learning Spanish so you can go and connect with Hispanic communities. Maybe it means working with refugees. Maybe it means getting involved in a prison ministry in a way that respects the dignity and the background of those people. It's so easy for us to, and again, if you're talking about missions overseas, the great white savior going and sharing the gospel to the Queequegs of the world. But if you're talking about prison ministry, if you're going in there with this sort of, I'm better than you because I haven't made the mistakes that you made, and I am going to show you, how to live so that when you get out after serving your time, which you deserve to be serving, you're going to know how to live because I'm going to show you, and everything's, then you're going to be okay. You've belittled that person, you've judged that person, you've marginalized who they are as a person, and again, you don't go in there and say, hey, it doesn't matter what crime you've committed, but it kind of doesn't, because that's not what you're there for. You're not there to judge them for their crime. You're there to share the gospel, and you're there to do it in a way that they feel loved, and they feel like they're a human, right? That you're on an equal level with them. So knowing how to do that doesn't come, maybe you need training for that sort of thing, but, we all want to get out there and do things, but, let's make sure that we're doing it in a way that's actually going to be effective and really reach people for the gospel.
Good.
So often if we take time to analyze our words and actions, we can see that maybe we're going to behave in a way that will drive people away rather than drawing them to the love of Christ. I'm going to share one more passage from Moby Dick here. This is the last one. But if I keep reading this book, which I will, maybe next time I speak it'll just be more Moby Dick. I don't know. So this story is, again, Queequeg, and now they're on a boat, and he's had a sort of interaction with one of the other sailors. You know, it was kind of, the man was disrespectful and rude to him because of his color and where he was from. And then you fast forward a couple of paragraphs, and there's a sort of a movement of the boat, and the guy falls into the water, and everyone like just kind of looks, and Queequeg just like dives in to the ocean and pulls the man out, and everyone's like, suddenly Queequeg's the hero. But this is Ishmael saying, was there ever such unconsciousness? He did not seem to think he at all deserved a medal from the humane and magnanimous societies. He only asked for water, fresh water, something to wipe the brine off. That done, he put on dry clothes, lighted his pipe, and leaned against the bulwarks, mildly eyeing those around him, seeming to say to himself, it's a mutual, joint stock world in all meridians. We cannibals must help these Christians. It's, basically he was, it was like his action did more to share the gospel than the supposed people around him that were claiming to be the Christian. And I just think that, we should be prepared to use whatever tools we can without compromising the gospel in any way in order to further the gospel. Imagine the impact of showing someone who doesn't know God that their actions are likely the result of the fact that they are God's child, even though they don't acknowledge Him as Father. In other words, if this was an opportunity for someone to talk to Queequeg and say, that action that you performed there, that care for your brother, that's God in you. That is, you don't know this God, you don't even realize that that's Him, but that love, that risk that you took for that person. So, when you're talking to unbelievers and you can highlight Christ's attributes in someone rather than promoting our own actions, then we can show people how some of them, what they already believe and hold to, lines up with the teachings of Christ. That they may not even know that they are affected by Christ in them. That they might not even realize. And if we can, rather than us trying to point out things about us and try to force the gospel down their throat, if we could actually draw them into a conversation about who they are and how God is using you, God is speaking to you through these actions, right? I mean, sometimes we're so eager to force rules on people, and it's more about character, right? Paul is not promoting actions that contradict the word, but the truth is that God shows more grace and mercy to people than we do, and He has more patience for them than we do. So, it's good. 8:10, right? I'm still good? Okay. So, I don't know who's watching online, if anyone is, that doesn't know Christ or is struggling in their walk with Christ. But I think that what I want to finish with is the idea that, yes, you can be upset if you're struggling in your walk with Christ and you come to church and you see things that you think are hypocritical or things that turn you off. That is insignificant compared to the importance of a relationship with Christ. And that can be within the church as well, right? I mean, people may leave the church because of, could be political stuff. It could be people getting called out from the pulpit because of the way they dress or whatever. But I use this example. I was talking to someone a couple of days ago. If you go to a restaurant and the food is excellent, but the service isn't good, it would be foolish, in my opinion, not to go back to the restaurant again for more good food just because the waiter or waitress didn't do a good job of serving the food. And I think it's the same thing with with Christianity, or a relationship with Jesus. If you reject Jesus, or walk away from the church because of the way people around you are behaving or talking or whatever, you're picking the wrong thing to affect your decision-making process, right? Jesus wants a relationship with you. He wants you to know Him. He wants you to experience Him, and He doesn't want you to get caught up in the mess that we know already exists in all of our lives. So again, for those, if there's anyone there that works with me, don't use my sarcasm and cynicism as an excuse not to come to church. No. But you know what I'm saying? It's like it's really important that people say, again, we know what it's like to have a relationship with Christ, so we're willing to sort of push through some of the stuff that gets in the way. But someone that doesn't have a relationship with Christ, they can't use the excuse of fallen man to stop them from coming to Christ, because we're going to always be getting in the way as much as we try not to.
I was just going to say, for believers, an unbeliever may not know this, but when you become a part of the body of Christ, it's actually the mercy and love of God that puts you in a family, and God watches how we're going to get along, and that rubbing each other is teaching us how to love each other, how to forgive each other, and God is like cheering us on. Yes, this is hard, but this is what I want to happen with you. I want you to be transformed into the image of Christ. And we know that Christ suffered, and we have to suffer in our relationships by being humble and doing what the Bible says and lifting other people up. It's like all training ground, and God is preparing us.
Yeah, we talked at the beginning about difficult things that we go through and how we don't always know why we're going through it, and we sort of use examples outside of the church, but it doesn't get easier just because we come into a building that's called a church and we hang out with supposed brothers and sisters of Christ. I say, I'm not saying they're not, but sometimes they don't feel like brothers and sisters, or we don't feel like brothers and sisters to them, and how we can't let that stop us from still reaching out to God and connecting with Him and allowing Him to change us. Right? We can't let the humanity get in the way of divinity, I guess. What's that?
Sorry, never mind. You looked over here and smiled, and I thought you caught us snickering. That's all.
It is a distraction. I'm gonna have to separate you guys next week.
At the bad kid table.
All right. Anyone have any closing comments about this? Anything? You two kids over there?
We're good.
You're good? Okay.
I was thinking when you were talking that it's important for us, because we aren't going to do everything right, to make sure that we are humble and we ask for forgiveness. And when we, get moody or have a moment, it happens to me at work too, and I'm just short with somebody or whatever, and I don't even necessarily mean to do it. But then I realized, hey, I was just short with that person, to be able to go back and say, hey, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's not how I should have acted. Forgive me.
Yeah.
And not blame it on anything, but just, hey, that's not who I should be. Because I think that opens the door more for them to then listen to us the next time.
Yeah, I think genuine humility is probably one of the most powerful tools that we can use as Christians, because if someone can tell that we're really humbling ourselves when in our daily walk, that can be more impactful almost than anything else. We were just, again, talking about someone on the way to work that we know she's just such a humble lady that you can tell that she has an ability to connect when she's witnessing, because people can just pick up on that humility. And so often people, confidence can come across as arrogance, and even if it's fake confidence, that we're trying to sort of talk ourselves up to doing something, that it can come across the wrong way, and then again, fake humility is just as bad. But when people can tell that you're genuine, you're contrite, that can be very impactful. So yeah. Okay, well, thank you all in the house. Thank you for those online. Everyone have a blessed week, and we'll see you back here on